4. I have a very special guest today, Andrew Jones, who is VP of Engineering for ELAC Audio and has an amazing history in this industry, as we're going to see. And I think we'll all learn a ton. I'm very excited learning about him, and we'll do that first, and then we'll get into some products and that kind of thing as well. How are you today, Andrew?
I'm good. Doing well this week as opposed to last week.
Yeah?
I mean, starting off with personal stuff, I have what probably most speaker engineers have, which is speaker engineer's back, which means over the course of the 40 years, I've wrecked my back. And every so often it just, boom, drops me like a stone. And that happened in the office last Monday. So I was a week off trying to recover from that.
I have been there myself. I have an inversion table, which really helps me a ton.
Oh,
and,
right.
If you don't have one, I'd highly recommend it. You'd be amazed what it'll do for you.
Right.
Really, it's great stuff. So before we get started, I want to ask everybody out there, our guest, if you will, to like and subscribe to the channel there. It helps us, honestly, with our Google search stuff. And, you know, last month we had, I don't know, I think about 24,000 minutes of our YouTube stuff viewed, which was pretty amazing. So we appreciate y'all's support out there and helping us with that. Also, if you don't mind going to HiFiBuys.com and signing up for our newsletter to help you keep informed of what's going on. As a matter of fact, we just sent out a newsletter that had a little bit of a couple of specials that ELAC had going on, and just want to keep everybody informed when there's a good buy on something, or we have something educational coming up and that kind of thing as well. So appreciate you doing that. Last week, we had Enno Vandermeer, the founder at Rune. Great discussion. And so that y'all know, any of the previous units or any of the previous HiFi chats that we've done, which there have been 23 of them, are all up on YouTube, HiFi Buys YouTube. And you end up finding it's actually, there's a lot of really great people up there. Get to learn about them and, again, their products, as you'll see today. Next week, we have the new owner, a very good friend of mine, Trent Suggs, the new owner of Audio Research. Really excited about having him on. And we also have Greg Stetson, the engineer at Lynbrook, which is PSP, NED, and Blue Sound. So he'll be on as well. So we're very excited about having him on. Also, any of the music that's been mentioned during these things, which we always ask about because that's why we all love this stuff. And you end up finding we have a HiFi Chats playlist that Chris will put up for you. So you can end up seeing Chris is in the background there. So anyway, Chris, I appreciate your efforts in these things as well to make sure that I don't have to do all this because I'd mess it up. But and during this COVID time, let's just remember to all just to be kind to each other out there. It doesn't cost anything, and it's pretty easy to do. So all right, so Andrew, you ready to get going?
I am indeed.
You know, I love that your email starts with A. Jones, because mine does too. I thought it was pretty cool. So anyway, getting to know a little bit about you. Tell us about your family and where you grew up.
Well, obviously, by the accent, I grew up in England.
I could kind of get that.
The north of England, so a place called Doncaster, where the railway yards are close to York.
Okay.
York Minster, and grew up kind of working class family up there, but good schools, and got the chance to, you know, we were kind of teachers' pets. I say we. I often, if I'm talking about myself, I'll talk about we, because, you know, the obvious thing, I'm an identical twin. And so that kind of guided how we grew up. We both got interested in the same things. And, you know, pre-teens, around 9, 10, 11, we got interested in electronics and we're building electronic kits and things.
Well, that's how you get so much done.
Yeah, my career started early. Actually, I like to joke that my career, when everyone says, well, what got you into hi-fi and when did you start? I say, I was started at the moment of birth, because being a twin and an identical twin and what are called mirror twins. So my brother is left-handed and I'm right-handed.
Wow.
So we're born as a stereo pair. And
that's pretty cool.
And then it's good job quadraphonic wasn't around in that time, or else my parents would
Yeah,
have had a real surprise.
I might have been unhappy. Oh my gosh.
So we just got interested. We were always nerds. We were engineering types. And so we got interested in electronics, and then hi-fi and photography. With photography, we even went as far, we like portrait photography. So we persuaded our parents to sell the furniture in our bedroom, because we shared a bedroom, take off the wallpaper, paint the walls light orange, get fold up camp beds and sleeping bags. And for 2 years, that's how we lived in that room, because we could then just fold everything up, turn it into a photo studio. So we had all the lights and the cameras, and we used to get all the good looking girls from school to come and do photo sessions. Very tasteful ones.
Of course.
But it was fun. So it was always that kind of thing. And what started with this hi-fi was an aunt gave us one of these old dance set all-in-one record players and a whole stack of 45s, lots of them going back to the 50s music. And that's what started on the path of listening to music. And then my dad got interested and bought a radiogram, and then we persuaded him to turn that into a separates, because separates were better. Of course, what he probably bought wasn't actually better, but at least we moved the speakers apart. And thereafter, we spent all our money on electronics and hi-fi. You know, we were doing all sorts of things, like built a little radio transmitter out of parts so we could get radio mics. I built from scratch, you know, the video games with the paddles and the ball that bounces back and forth. Pong. I built one from discrete gates and you know, and OR gates and stuff, and built a modulator for the TV. So we had all these boards across the living room floor plugged into the family TV, laying on the floor playing Pong. That just all these kind of crazy things. Most times, though, nothing ever actually got finished.
Yes. I learned that. Time to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. But my parents were very supportive, because they'd let us just take over the living room floor and do stuff all over them. Soldering iron hung up on the door of the cupboard, and every so often it would drop off and you'd just instinctively dive to catch it so it didn't burn the carpet, but you'd get the burn marks all across the
Any other brothers or sisters?
No, just the two of us. I think awesome. Yeah, the shock was enough, and that was done. We got our family.
Was your dad in electronics?
No, he he went into the Navy as soon as he could when he was 18, stayed on until he got married, and then just took regular type jobs. But he eventually ended up qualifying as an operating room technician and worked in the local hospital. Awesome. So he did what he could within the opportunity he was given.
Awesome.
But, like all good parents, they wanted better for us, and so they were fully behind our hobbies and our interests, because we didn't, I'm not saying I'm a goody two shoes, but we didn't get into trouble because we'd always got interesting stuff that we're into. And all our same group of friends were doing that kind of stuff.
I can imagine for your parents it was a little tough keeping up with you two, especially with two of you guys going at it all the time. That's awesome.
Yes. Oh, and going at it. So what was always fun. So as identical twins, you can get very jealous of what the other one might have that you don't, right? Okay. And we'd fight all the time, and but we developed our own set of rules for how you fight. If we hit each other and that was too hard, you have to stand there while I hit you the same as you hit me, and you do it. We've got these rules. Parents would lock us in a different room and just wait till it goes quiet, and we just get out between ourselves.
Let them work it out.
Yeah, and then
that's great.
If you're cutting a piece of cake, the problem is, do you each have the same size piece of cake? And we'd argue who's got the biggest piece. So parents were given some very sage advice, which was one cuts, the other chooses. Right? So that forces you to become very good at cutting. However, technically, in the limit, whoever is cutting ends up with the smallest piece because they're not choosing. So no matter how carefully you think you cut it,
The
the other one will go, yeah, I got the biggest piece. So now the argument isn't who's got the biggest piece, it's whose turn is it to cut.
I can just see y'all coming up with funky angles on your cut and all that kind of stuff. And then trying to figure out, I can imagine the argument over who got the first piece. I mean, that was probably difficult too. Yeah. Wow, awesome. Well, I probably don't have to ask you about hobbies. It's amazing how much audio and photography goes together. We see that throughout the industry. It's
yes,
come up. So
it is. Anyway. And I love the photography part. You know, that there's, in any science subject, there's still a degree of artistry if you think about innovation and how you create, you know, creative ideas. Mm-hmm. And photography is another of those areas where you're fully combining art and technical. You can be as interested in the equipment as you want, which we were, but then it's how do you capture a good image? And I guess that's exactly the same with designing hi-fi. Mm-hmm. I grew up, and we'll get into that later, but I grew up in companies that were highly technical and fantastic background for learning for me. But it's still, when it comes down to it, what does it sound like? Mm-hmm. And so you've got that melding in both of those fields of interest.
Education-wise, did you go to college for this, or you?
Yeah, so all through school, we had great teachers, you know, the teachers you just long to have, who are really interested in the kids, do everything they can to push you along. They used to, our maths teacher and our chemistry teacher used to invite us round to their homes at weekends for extra tuition. They'd gather a group of kids and just give us that extra coaching to help us out. And you know, some of them were just these classic, old style British teachers. And I don't know if you know the Goon Show, which was a precursor to Monty Python. The kind of humor that Monty Python grew up with,
I love it,
was from the Goon Show. And the Goon Show started as a radio series, Harry Seacombe and people like that. So some of the teachers, we'd got classes that would have a physics class on one side of the hallway and a chemistry class on the other. And every so often, these teachers would be shouting the Goon Show scripts at each other. And then they'd swap over and teach each other's class, because at that stage, a lot of chemistry was the same as physics. So you could teach each other's class. So we'd have that going on. We'd have class demonstrations in chemistry where the chemistry teacher, great teacher, but he wasn't very good at practical stuff. He'd tell us what we should be doing, and he'd tell us when it was wrong. And then every so often he'd give a class demonstration. So he'd do that particular chemistry experiment himself on the bench in front of the whole class. Well, we quickly learned to bring in our cameras, have the front row, and we'd be like this with our camera and be watching the demonstration through the camera, waiting for the right moment when he screwed it up and broke something. He's clamping onto a test tube. Boys and girls, you always put the test tube in a bung, rubber bung, before you clamp onto it, because otherwise you can break it. But I know what I'm doing, so I don't need to do that. I'm thinking, okay, get the camera ready. This is a prime example. Or he'd disappear in flames because he mixed the wrong, anyway. So
well, that's pretty awesome. I think that's great that the professors could actually swap classes, because you probably learned a lot more by learning from both as opposed to just one. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So. And so, you know, being technical, being twins, they all knew we were into all this kind of stuff. So they were very particular about making sure we got the right careers. But the careers master knew he didn't need to do anything, because we knew more about what we needed to study and which universities to pick than he did. And so we both started looking for universities and picked different ones. This was the first time we'd been apart, because my brother, whereas we both started with electronics, I at some point got more interested in the speaker side of hi-fi. And so I realized I needed physics and acoustics, whereas he needed electronics. So he went off to one university for his undergrad, and I went off to a different one, which is quite interesting now, being apart. So I did my physics, and then we actually joined together at his university to do postgrad research under Professor Hawksford. So he was researching novel amplifier technology topologies, and my project was computer-aided crossover network design, a new approach to how you kind of do the mathematics of it. So that was fun. So that was another 3 years. So a total of 6 years of that, undergrad and postgrad.
Where did you go?
I went off to University of Surrey.
Okay.
And that's just south of London. He went to Essex University, which is east of London. And then, as I say, I joined him at his university. Great times. And the great thing for us, especially with the where we grew up, was that education at that time was totally free. If you qualified, if the university accepted you, then the government paid all tuition fees.
Wow.
And they also gave you a grant for living expenses. And I think at that time, back in the mid to late 70s, it was somewhere around £2,000 a year for accommodation, food, books, that kind of stuff. And that was means tested. So if your parents were rich, they had to pay 80 or 90% of that. If they weren't rich, they only had to pay 10%. And our parents didn't have much money, and there were two of us at the same time. So pretty much the government paid all of that. So 6 years of university education.
Wow.
No cost whatsoever.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I look back and I'm so thankful for that, because I wouldn't be where I am now if it wasn't for that access to education.
Somehow knowing you, I think you'd have made it through either way. You're a pretty determined guy when you got your mind on something. So, so I would ask you about life experiences, things that have had an impact on who you are. I know you've kind of already really mentioned that in that degree. Is there anything that kind of sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, so this idea of being an identical twin, that's the first thing that impacts your life, because people's view of you is very different than if you're just a single regular person. In that, as a solo person, you got to make your friendships, and hopefully you can be gregarious enough to go out and talk to people and make friends, or you're going to be just the nerd that I was, but interesting. But as a twin, everybody comes to you because you're different. They want to play the typical games of, oh, let me turn my back, you swap positions, see if I can still tell who's who. And that's entertaining for the first 3 or 4 times, and then it gets very wearing. But it does change how you develop your personality. I mean, first of all, your personality is sort of determined by other people. You're supposed to be the same, and they only notice the similarities rather than the dissimilarities. But also, you don't have to go out and be confident enough to approach other people to make friends. They're going to come to you. And that's good and bad, because it might mean you're a bit reticent to approach people. It wasn't until we were apart at university that now we're on our own and we have to make our own friendships. But the other thing that helped me with this was I did go to university with our best friend to do physics. He was going to do physics as well. But after the first 10-week term, he was going, I can't do physics. It's just too difficult at university level. So he switched to doing social studies.
Okay.
But he was interested in folk music. And with our hi-fi, he'd recommend folk music to us. He played guitar. He sung badly. But he wanted to join the folk dance team called Morris Dancing at the university, but he was much too shy. So he was saying, Andrew, come along. I want you to come and join this dance group with me. And I'm going, no way am I going to do folk dancing. I wouldn't even go to a disco to dance. I was much too shy for that. We used to run the disco as a way of being there, but no, sorry, we can't come and dance because we're taking care of the music. It was even our hi-fi equipment. The school disco was, and we didn't have a car in those days. It's North England. It's not California where
you have a disco ball and all that.
Not quite, but we used to get like a group of 6 or 7 friends come to our house, each pick up a piece of equipment, a speaker for one person, a speaker for the other, the amplifier, the turntable, the whatever. And we'd walk with this stuff 2.5 miles to school to set up the disco. It was crazy.
Wow.
So, I'd never danced, but okay, I gave in. I went to try this out. And I ended up really liking it because with disco dancing, especially if you're just shy, which we were at that time, you're thrown it at the deep end. You're supposed to walk out onto a floor and start moving, and you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. And you feel everybody's watching you, watching you, just you.
Right, not anybody else.
Flail around. And so with this Morris dancing, you had to learn all the steps and the sequences, and eventually you'd go out and dance in public. And I just got to love it. My friend was useless at it. He gave up, left me to it. For the next 20 odd years, I danced with the best teams in England, won competitions, traveled around Europe and America doing this stuff. So that was one of my interests. And because I'd learned what I need to do, but then as I'm learning it, I'm analyzing it because my brain is always going into analyze mode. Well, what am I doing and how could I make it better? And watch everybody else and then try and do that or improve it. And it's that it got me used to being out in front of the public. As long as I can be showing you what I know, I feel comfortable. But still put me back in a cocktail party amongst people I don't know, and I'll have a bit still that kind of shyness, that wallflower comes back.
What an amazing experience for you to have, to be able to, find something that allows you to kind of really put that out there. And that's really awesome.
It is, yeah. And that was further improved when after my research, I moved along the hallway to do active noise control and anti-noise. And I was working on big systems, like putting them on around the funnel or the stack of a ship to cancel out 130 dB at 30 hertz kind of noise levels. So I was using ATC drivers. So I got to know Billy Woodman, who founded ATC, and just building systems for that. My brother eventually joined me in that research group, and he was working on similar systems. So we're in hi-fi. Well, we weren't in hi-fi. I was in speakers, but not hi-fi speakers.
Right.
And longing to get into a real hi-fi company. But
so how did you get there?
Sorry?
That was actually the next question, how you got into this business. So it sounds like you're right on the verge of that.
So, because I was in research, I was part of a member of the Audio Engineering Society, and I'd go occasionally up to London for lectures. And I remember the first week that I joined this noise cancellation group, we were working on a system. One of their previous research engineer always coming to me in my research group, asking questions about speakers. So when he left and the prof was advertising for a new research officer, I went along to the prof and said, well, it's got to be me because your guy used to come to me to ask all the questions about speakers. So who else would you employ but the guy who was giving him all his advice? And prof goes, okay, you got the job.
Wow.
And so I go in on the first week and they'd set up this system. So they were cancelling the noise from engines. So they got an engine in the lab, and they got the exhaust pipe, and they've got a speaker. And in order to mix the two sound sources together to cancel, the speaker and the exhaust pipe both went into this mixing box that was over the front of the woofer. And then the exhaust vented out of that. And it was performing horribly. It took a lot of power. It wasn't really working well. And that week was when Laurie Fincham, who was the technical director of KEF, was giving a lecture at the AES on the couple cavity that eventually became the KEF 1042, couple cavity loading technique. So I go up to this lecture, and it was kind of this whole light bulb goes off, because he shows this couple cavity, which is a woofer operating into a closed box on the back with a vented box on the front. I go, that's what we've got. We're just putting the exhaust into that front cavity. That's the system. So he'd got some handouts of all the mathematics of it. So I went to talk to him, and can I have that paper? I need to go back. So I went back the next day and started doing the maths, and within a week built this new system, and it now performed wonderfully, and we got all this noise cancellation. And so that started my thing with, you know, direct contact with Laurie at KEF. And then so after we go to shows, I go and see him and say hi. And at one point, after about 3 years of doing this, I must have said something at one show to him, because about a week after this particular show, I get a phone call at my research lab. Hi, this is Laurie Fincham from KEF here. You know, when we were talking the other day, it occurred to me that you've never had an opportunity to come and look around the factory. Would you like to do so? And
yes.
Yes. So we set up this visit, and after I put the phone down, I'm thinking, okay, I've known him for quite a while now. Why is he suddenly asked if I wanted to visit the factory? I'm thinking, is this kind of a clandestine job interview? What have I said to him? And I realized I said, yeah, you know, the week before, yeah, I'm looking to see if I can move more into the hi-fi industry. But I'm going to treat this as a job interview. So I went up there, sure enough, job interview, and I got it. So
you were at KEF what, 12 years, 10 years?
11 years.
Okay.
Started off in research, because I came from a research background, and he told me that, you know, you probably won't have chance to learn on the job for doing product, because we can't make mistakes when we're doing product. But that didn't work out. You know, after 5 years or whatever time period it was, I moved from research to become chief engineer for product development. The big difference, right? This is my motto, coming from a research background. If I knew what I was doing, it wouldn't be research. So,
true.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you got to be willing to make mistakes. So, and I'm sure you've made a few in your day to be able to come out with the things you have that have wow, succeeded. And we're going to get to some of those. So I'm really excited about that.
Right.
So do you have a first time where, like, you know, you heard a system and you went, oh my gosh, like that wow moment?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
You know, before going off to university, and part of the time in the early days at university, we were buying hi-fi equipment. So any bit of pocket money we were given, any job that we did, went towards funding our hi-fi habit. And so we ended up with a Thorens TD160, Shaw V15 Mark III. Amplifier was just a Sinclair amplifier, and the speakers were not even mine, because remember, I never finished a project. I was always building, but never finishing. So it was a semi-decent system. Oh, and a Tandberg tape recorder, so that we wouldn't wear out our vinyl. We recorded all our albums on tape and listened to the tape. That's how nerdy we were. So got off to university, first week on the course, getting to know all the other students, and chatting to this one guy. And I was interested in why is everyone studying physics? Because it's, you know, a very specialized subject. Why would you choose to do physics? You must have chosen to do physics. And it was very disappointing to find a lot of people just said, well, I was kind of good at it at school, so I decided to do it at university. I'm thinking, that's not the answer. That's not the friend I want. Talked to this other guy, this guy Arthur, and he said, oh, I've been into hi-fi forever, and I wanted to study physics so I can learn what I need to get more into hi-fi. Okay, that's my friend. That's the one. So I go around to see his system, and he's got quad 33, 303 preamp power amp, ESL 57.
Man.
Forget the turntable, but it's a Hadcock unipivot pickup arm with a Decca London cartridge. Oh, well, holy grail. He put that on, and I remember the album. It was Neil Diamond Taproot manuscript.
Wow.
And the second side, and he put that on, and it's kind of never, you know, even to this day, it's difficult for most people to understand how good that system was.
Yep.
So it was a revelation to me, and that started me on the path. And
I will tell you that quad 57s and 63s, of course, but more 57s come up in these chats, mainly because the guys that are, you know, well established in their careers, actually the 57 was kind of the speaker back in that time. And you had, you know, some JBLs and stuff like that were doing something completely different. But
yeah,
I remember the last pair of 57s I got in on trade at the store. I wanted to keep, and I just couldn't, and I had no place to put them, and still don't have a place to put them, but gosh, I wish I'd have kept them.
Yeah. So, you know, the first opportunity I had, I bought 57s. It was at the, I used to frequent Guildford Hi-Fi at the top of the high street in Guildford, where the university was. Got to know, the owner was American and had moved to England and set up a hi-fi store. That's when I first heard Dahlquist DQ10.
Wow.
And that was the first time I experienced imaging that I could walk around. Yeah, the vocalist was just there, and I felt I could walk around it and listen. So quite an experience. So I finished my degree, go off to join my brother in research, and I come back to visit my friends in Guildford. One weekend, I go off up to Guildford Hi-Fi because, you know, you must have them. Guys come in all the time. They don't spend money, or not much, but they want to listen to everything. And so the guy had just taken in part exchange a pair of ESL 57s. It was also the start of term at university when you got your living expenses.
I'm
thinking, I've got all this money.
And I don't need to eat.
Yeah, I can eat noodles for the rest of the term, and I can also sell them at any time if I need money.
Yeah, so, I give my right arm. I'll take them.
I bought these things and called my brother. I was still, you know, back at Essex University, and guess what I just bought? And he goes, no, guess what I just bought? I go, okay, you go first. What did you just buy? I just bought a pair of ESL 57s. And I go, I just bought a pair of ESL 57s. What we're going to do now? We go stack them. So I took mine back with me to the university. We built these frames. We stacked them. The professor in charge of our research group loaned us the Dayline transmission line subwoofer that he'd built, which was this long bench style thing. We put that up on its end between the two speakers, and it kind of totally blocked the end of the room we were sharing, but it sounded magnificent.
I bet.
So yeah, ESL 57s. And the nice thing, you know, that got me into electrostatics. And through KEF, I got to know Peter Walker really well, and became good friends. And when he was retiring, he talked to me about whether I was interested in understudying and taking over. And I was so tempted, but I thought my career path is probably better opportunities if I'm learning more about normal speakers than what the future is with electrostatics at Quad. So I kind of declined the offer. Always regretted not being able to learn everything directly from Peter, but nonetheless, put me on the path that I've ended up on.
I think you're definitely a hands-on guy. You got to be involved in the creation of it. And so
yeah.
I think you probably did the right thing for yourself, or at least it seems like you're very rewarded by your job. So I think that's great. The passion is obvious. And you were talking about the folks that come in, and it's, you can always tell them because the passion is so high. And I mean, it's, and I love that. And they love learning. And so I love teaching. And so,
the teaching is, I love the teaching aspect.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about a particular piece of music that moves you and why, and how did you find it?
So again, back in the days when I was at KEF, I joined KEF, let's say 77, 83. So it was just as CD was coming out. First players really were readily available in 83.
Yep.
And so I'm working at KEF, and we get the first CD player, the Sony CDP 101. Then we get the Meridian rebadging of the Philips Magbox, I think, over here, player. And we maintained a strong connection with Meridian all the years I was at KEF. At one point, KEF bought Meridian. And, that started my relationship with Bob Stewart, and Alan Boothroyd did industrial design for us. So when I moved over here and started at Pioneer, well, I started Infinity first, but after that, when I started at Pioneer, I brought Alan in to design my first Pioneer speakers, and then to design the first TAD speaker. But anyway, so we've got CD, and especially with the sort of stranglehold that Ivor Tiefenbrunn of Lynn had on the UK hi-fi industry. Lynn name was the partnership that determined what everyone should think hi-fi should sound like, let's say. And there was this all-pervasive digital is crap. And there's no emotion in digital. And so I don't think I necessarily believe that. But when a lot of people say it, you start to question yourself, which is, it's always good to question yourself.
Yes.
But you question yourself, go, is it just me then that doesn't believe that? What am I missing? What am I not hearing that tells me I could be hearing so much more out my analog system than I can possibly from a digital system? So I remember being at my friends in the dance team in this new town that I belonged to. One of them was a real jazz enthusiast. And I liked jazz. I just didn't know what jazz I liked. And I said to him, okay, can you do something for me? Put together about a dozen different recordings of different styles of jazz. Then I'll listen to those. I'll tell you which ones I like, and then you can guide me further along that path. So he did this for me. And he said, there's one recording in here, one CD, that isn't jazz, but you need to listen to it. Okay. So I've been gradually listening through all these different CDs and LPs. And then it's one Saturday afternoon, I'm just busy tying up the house. Oh, that CD. So I put it on, and it was Astor Piazzolla, Tango 0 Hour. And it's the new tango. He was vilified when he started this concept of new tango because it was not traditional tango, but masterpieces of music. And now he's, one of the biggest, I mean, he's not around now, but the most well-known figures in tango music in Argentina. So I put this on, not expecting much, but within the first minute, with the way this thing plays, with the way he's playing the bandoneon. I was transfixed. So I just sat down on the floor, listened to the whole thing, crying my eyes out at the end. It just grabs you and takes you on this journey from melodic to angry to back to melodic and everything.
Well, honestly, I've never heard it, and I can't wait to. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, Tango Zero out. You'll be amazed. So
this very much tied into your dance stuff too. So that was
yes,
quite good. So yeah.
And so at the end of it, feeling all these emotions from it, my nerd brain switches back on and go, wait a minute, that was CD. You're not supposed to experience emotion with music played back over the CD. It's a load of crap, this. You can, with a properly set up system, get emotionally involved with the music over CD. So it was kind of an OMG moment in two respects: finding music that was that powerful, and then kind of, oh, let's analyze this and my reaction to it. And funny, with the connection with music, I belonged to two folk dance teams at that time, both very different styles of English folk dance. But one of the guys, he was the musician, or one of the musicians for the team. He was always into different kinds of music, and he'd always bring along different kinds of music that he'd been experimenting with. And it wasn't folk music, but could we create a dance, a folk style dance to this music? One time he'd been listening to Dave Brubeck, Take 5, and he comes in with his melodeon, and he's taken the most standard English folk tune, Speed the Plough, and changed it into 5/4 time. And then we design a dance for it where we step in time to Take 5. So it's left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. That's the stepping we're doing to it. When we go out to a folk dance event and do this thing, people, wait, what's going on here? This is not Speed the Plough, but wait, it's Speed the Plough. And then another time he comes in with his clarinet, he's been listening to klezmer music. And he's going, guys, have you ever heard about klezmer music? No, what the hell is that? He starts playing klezmer music for us to dance to. It just fun having all those interactions between the music and the dance and the technical side of it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Sounds like great experiences and that kind of thing. And when you find an album that can hit you so emotionally like that, it's pretty amazing. I've found it in my life, and what I find is they hit me differently at different times as I go through my life, and that's been kind of, I don't know, interesting for me to see and watch. And well,
it's also interesting that first album that I heard on a real hi-fi system, Taproot manuscript. It's amazing what comes around, because during my time with TAD, I got to become good friends with Bill Snay, who recording engineer who brought Thelma Houston to Sheffield Labs label.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used to help, have him give talks when I was doing my TAD demos at CES, and I used to visit his studio, which was quite close to where I live. And I go there one day with Peter Madnick, of Alchemy, Audio Alchemy. And so we're looking around, and Peter's studio, Bill's studio has got every gold and platinum album he's ever received for engineering all around, all through the toilets, and any bit of space has got these albums. And he's got all of these things from Neil Diamond, because he did a lot of the engineering work on various Neil Diamond albums, including the one You Don't Bring Me Flowers with Barbara Streisand.
Wow.
So Peter and I are talking to him about that, and we find out that when he was working with Doug Sachs for doing the Sheffield Labs, he was telling Doug, you've got to have a vocal album. All your stuff is instrumental, Lincoln Mayorga and stuff like that. You need vocal. And he'd already been recording Barbara, so he wanted to bring Barbara to do a direct cut album. But at the time, her boyfriend / manager wouldn't release her for this. So we ended up bringing Thelma Houston. So, that's an interesting connection there. And of course, I've got that Thelma Houston album. I've got the Lincoln Mayorga, all the direct cut. I've also got that Neil Diamond, You Don't Bring Me Flowers. And you've got the Taproot manuscript. So Peter's getting very nerdy about this, because just a bigger nerd as I am, because when he was in high school, he had a friend called Debbie who was so in love with Neil Diamond. She changed her name to Debbie Diamond. So he's going, I'm still friends with her. I've got to take pictures, me and you, with all these Neil Diamond albums and send it to her. So, well, if we're getting that nerdy, here's my deal. 3 albums. I'm going to bring them to you, Bill. One is Taproot manuscript. I'd like you to get Neil to sign this if you could. And then You Don't Bring Me Flowers, because it's you and Neil. Get that one signed. Then you, Bill, sign Thelma Houston as, So tried to get this done, but it turns out Neil Diamond doesn't sign albums any longer, because people were just selling them on eBay and on the internet and everything. I got a signed photograph, but I just wanted to complete that connection, because that album was the first one I heard on a real hi-fi system.
That's pretty
Now
neat.
I'm designing hi-fi systems and working with the engineer who worked with Neil Diamond. It would have been the perfect closed loop thing, but
it sounded amazing people. I've always really enjoyed and I love the albums that you've mentioned, but the Lincoln Mayorga that you mentioned, the direct to disc, I think they had like 4 or 5 versions of that, but that's with his distinguished colleagues, I believe. And
that's right. Yeah.
Anyway, I play that here at the store quite a bit. Can't remember the name of the tune that I play a bit, but that whole album I love. It's really an amazing piece of work. So
yeah,
I've always really enjoyed Neil Diamond's work as well. So that's great. So tell us a little bit about who is or are your mentors in this business and life. I'm sure you've run into a few smart people from what it sounds like. So curious
yes,
who had influence on your life.
Mostly because of my time at KEF. People ask me, how do I get into the hi-fi industry? Well, you need to have mentorship. Yes, I did a degree in physics, which had acoustics as part of that. I could have gone to a different university that had way more acoustics. I just didn't realize at the time. But it wouldn't have landed me where I am now because of the opportunities I got. So, yeah.
Isn't that funny how it works out?
Yeah, yeah. So, learning about speakers was when I got to KEF, because they had proper research facilities. Laurie Fincham was masterful in his knowledge and his ability to get things out to people and direct them. So he was my mentor at that time, but he insisted you have to belong to the Audio Engineering Society. We have to go to every lecture once a month. We all, at the end of the day, get in a car, drive up to London, go to the lecture. Then we all go out for dinner afterwards with the lecturer, with all the other companies that come along to that lecture. So it could be the guys from Celestion driving 150 miles down occasionally to the lectures. The guys from B&W, Peter Walker from Quad, Peter Baxendale. We'd all go out to dinner together and just talk. And so Peter Walker became a mentor as well. And you just knew that if you were stuck on a problem, you could call him up and say, or you talk at dinner about, hey, I'm having this issue. A couple of days later, Peter would call up and go, oh, Andrew, I was thinking what you said about dinner the other night. And then he'd just lay out this wonderful, simple way of looking at it. That if it needed more than A-level math, math you learn by the time you're 18, then he'd failed in imparting the understanding of what this issue was. You don't rely on maths, you rely on the kind of the physics of what's going on. So I had that, and then Dick Small. So, you know, Teal Small parameters. Dr. Richard Small and Neville Teal. Dick joined us and worked as head of research at KEF. So I worked with him for 3 or 4 years. That was a wonderful mentorship as well. And then any lecturer who came along to give a lecture up in London, we always invited them down to the factory to give us a personal lecture first. So we got to know Lipschitz and Van der Kooi, the 2 professors at Waterloo University in Canada, who are some of the best researchers in the field of, one was head of physics at the university, the other was head of mathematics, and both interested in hi-fi. So it was just, and Dick Heiser, just anyone who was anyone, we had access to. Yeah. And it's that kind of upbringing.
That was an amazing company during that time. I mean, just
it was
innovative,
yes, it was.
As they could be, and yeah, the 107.2s, I think, and you know.
So the 107.2 was my first reference speaker that I did when I became chief engineer.
That's awesome.
So
amazing product.
Yeah,
it really was. And the 104.2s, I mean, I don't know how many billions of pairs of those things y'all sold, but that was a pretty expensive speaker in that pair of in that day. But wow,
it was, and that they were developing that. As I joined, they were about halfway through the development process. So I was in research. I had no responsibility with that product other than they wanted to investigate new kinds of iron cores for the inductors, something called iron dust cores. So my job was to take these inductors and plot the saturation characteristics of them. So we knew how big the core needed to be for any particular inductor value. And so I had a very peripheral kind of involvement with it, but nothing I can boast about.
What's also amazing is that you changed the noise deadening for the motors with what you learned about that speaker and its design. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
to think about it.
You're always learning in everything, or should be in everything that you do, and absorbing information from other people. Try not to pass it off as your own.
Yes. Well, it's always good to give credit where it's due. And, you know, the idea is great people always try and get the people around them to grow bigger than them. And that's one of the greatest things that I've learned from probably the mentors that have been in my life. So, so tell us a little bit about your path to ELAC audio.
So about my what?
Your path to ELAC.
Oh, right. So I'd already... Floyd Toole was the one who invited me to move across the pond to come and work in America with the Harman Group, and it turned out to be Infinity. And in fact,
I got to meet him about 5 years ago at the luxury division. That was a lot of fun. We sat down at dinner and stuff. He's really a great guy. Great guy.
And so he was longtime friends with Laurie Fincham, and so I got to know him, you know, through being there at KEF. And KEF had changed hands, you know, it'd been bought out and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, it turns out he offered Laurie a job to move to the States, and then on the side he approached me to see if I wanted to come as well. And so I said yes, except let Laurie go out for a year first and see if he likes it. If he does, I'll come out and join him. So that's how it worked out. And so I joined Laurie again, working at Infinity, until after about 3 years, we both left. He went off to head up research at THX, and I was given this opportunity to work for Pioneer.
Okay.
But, you know, it was Floyd who was responsible for that path of getting to there. And through Pioneer, and of course people said, why would you join a Japanese speaker company? Japanese don't make good speakers. I'm going, you're actually wrong. You know, I see all the research that they do. They do way better research than we're doing. It's just they have a different idea of what they want to create, but the engineering is unsurpassed. My idea of joining Pioneer was I get access to that kind of technology but with the responsibility to design stuff how I want it to sound. And it was just a great, fantastic partnership.
Well, I know you had a couple of models. I don't remember what the models were, but you had a couple of speakers that just, I mean, sold just, I mean, I I don't know how many pairs of them you sold, but it was a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly in the latter days at Pioneer, when we did this partnership with Best Buy to design those low-cost speakers, and the starting price was $89 a pair. It very quickly went up to $99, and then the Generation 2 was $129 a pair. They were real speakers at that price point, and that was a fantastic opportunity to switch from doing $80,000 speakers to doing $89 speakers and have such tremendous success with them. It was a great time.
To back you up a little bit, what was your favorite speaker at Infinity that you worked on?
I would say it was the Prelude. Well, Prelude and Overture. So the Prelude I was working on before I'd even got to the States, because I had to work my notice at KEF, and then I had to get my work permit to move out here. So I was doing some initial work on that from my home in England while waiting for the permissions. And that was that tall tower with 4 mid-bass drivers, 2 mid-range tweeter, with a self-powered bass section that was fully integrated. So you just plugged in your speaker cables and you were good to go. And shortly after that one, we developed the Overture range. Was a more conventional looking speaker range, but same principle. But the Overture was a bookshelf speaker, just a foot tall, a foot deep, about 5 inches wide, side firing 8-inch bass unit, 92 dB. Sorry?
I've owned a couple of pairs of them.
Yeah, I still have a pair. They're over in my lab. And that was one of my favorites, because it was the first self-powered bass section speakers on the market, and it fulfilled a real need and allowed people to have a efficient bookshelf speaker or an efficient tower that had bass extension, but you could still use a regular amplifier. So that was my favorite from Infinity.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So then moving from there, you got to ELAC, and how did that happen?
So
or not from Infinity, you went to Pioneer after Infinity.
Pioneer for a total of 17 years, Pioneer plus TAD. And Pioneer were going through lots of changes, and I started wondering what should be doing. So a group of us got the idea of, shall we try and do something else? And we were approached by the owners of ELAC, who were looking to expand ELAC. ELAC was been around since 1926, 27, and obviously a German company based in northern Germany. And they started off making turntables and cartridges. They actually have the patent for the moving magnet cartridge, and so they licensed that to Shaw, and they built for Shaw in those days. Benjamin Miracord turntable, very popular over here. So they grew to be the 3rd largest turntable manufacturer in the world in those days, until everything changed with CD. So they switched to doing speakers. So they've been doing speakers since the mid-80s. But with speakers, they never really cracked the US market. They're very popular through Europe, well known in Asia. And I'd seen them every year I was doing TAD at Munich. I would see the ELAC booth and see the interesting stuff they were doing, but I never personally got to know the guys at ELAC, but I knew of the product. Well, we get approached about the idea of joining ELAC by starting a division over here in the States to crack the US market. First by designing speakers that we know will work in the US market, establishing a path for that, and then starting to look at what we can do as a combined company to both bring in existing product and co-develop new product. And when we looked and analyzed what should we be doing for that, we realized that the success, ELAC was a mid-high-end speaker company. So they didn't have starter speakers. So, a store like yourself, you can't bring people to the brand unless they've got a couple of $1,000s to spend on a pair of speakers. I got experience in doing everything from $80,000 down to $89. We'd had that huge success with those Pioneer speakers. We sold $50 million worth of those low-cost speakers. That's a lot of speakers. And people are already asking us, well, we love these, but we'd like something a bit better. We'd like to spend a bit more. So we thought, the way to approach this new idea for ELAC is develop speakers of that next price point upwards and show what can be done with a bit more money, but even better sound. And that now gives an added market for ELAC, not just in terms of having sales in the US, but sales in the rest of the world of more affordable entry product that can help bring people into the ELAC fold. And, there's always a potential danger there of, but we're a mid-high-end speaker company and you want to do a $250 speaker, that'll devalue the brand. And even if you're about to start a brand new speaker company, you've always got this dilemma. Do I start low and go high or start high and go low? At some point, the thought is starting high, I can't go below a certain price point because it'll be considered devaluing the brand. If I start at very affordable prices and try and go up, well, what would you know about high-end speakers, right? You're just adding money to it without knowing what you're doing. But we kind of reasoned that putting my big hat on my big head to say, I've done every price point. It didn't affect TAD by bringing out a $90 speaker. In fact, people celebrated it because the guy who's designed a really expensive speaker still cares about people who don't have money. Because I'm still a hobbyist at heart. I'm on a lot of the DIY audio sites. And I go to some of the DIY audio meets where people bring along their speakers and look what I designed. So we were saying that can work for ELAC as well. And it worked really well.
Well, especially if it's a highly respected speaker, because it can be a highly respected speaker at a lower price point. And as long as that respect's there,
Exactly.
It's kind of one of the reasons, you guys are I hate to call it, but price entry brand for our store. And I say that price entry brand because we're trying to make sure that we don't leave anybody out and we don't want to sell junk in a box. So, we want to make sure we stay north of that. And you guys build one hell of a product at a reasonable price. And congratulations to you for one, the move and getting them convinced to do it. Because we would not be here together today probably without both of those things happening. So anyway, congrats to you on that.
Well, thank you.
So you've been now with ELAC, gosh,
5 years, 5.5 years.
Time just flies like crazy. And my buddy Travis is heading up sales for North America for you. And
Yes, it is.
So anyway, great guy. So tell us, what are the main reasons that ELAC Audio is who they are, not what they are?
I think, obviously what you are is partly determined by the product you have and the kinds of technologies you use. And you could say, at least traditionally, what ELAC are a company dedicated to air motion transformer type speakers, which they call jet emission tweeter. They were the first ones outside of the US to adopt that kind of technology back in the mid to late 80s, and they ran with it, and it's their signature. But you can always separate out what they are from who you are, is who is involved in doing the designs. Because although we might all have all the design programs, the CAD design programs these days, the measuring capability, the technical resources to design something, what it sounds like is sort of defined by the measured performance, but also sort of not.
Yep.
And it's not, I don't say, you can spend way too much time on the internet following these threads of measured versus sound.
Objective listening.
Objective versus subjective. And what is a properly conducted subjective test to determine what is better or not? And this could occupy the next 2 hours, but basically, yes, measurement defines an awful lot about how something sounds, presuming you know how to measure and interpret those measurements. So even that idea of measuring has got 2 parts to it: how to measure, how to interpret the measurements. Now, starting off in my very early days at KEF, my responsibilities were researching better and more accurate ways of measuring speakers. So it's become the essence of me, of knowing how to measure and believing I know how to measure better than what I see most people doing these days. I was asked at one panel discussion at a show, how has modern availability of computers and low-cost measuring systems changed how people go about designing? And I said, oh, that's an easy one. It allows them to get the wrong answer much quicker than they used to. Because
I was figuring that it would help them get to a basic place quicker.
It definitely does that.
Okay.
What is that basic place? If you don't know what a good measurement looks like, you get to a place that is somewhere beyond what you would have got before, but could lead you astray if you believe too much in the measurement. And why should we believe too much of the measurement rather than our own ears when we listen? And that gets into that subjective thing of, well, first of all, you've got to know how to listen and not fool yourself. So you need double-blind tests. And this would be the Floyd Toole kind of Sean Olive approach, which they did Harman. But one of the issues here is that there is no perfectly accurate speaker, assuming we know how to define what accuracy means. Even if we do a simple definition of accuracy as being, it's a perfectly flat response. It might have a bit of a tilt to it, but basically it's a linear response over a wide enough range of angles that it'll work in a room, and low distortion, low resonances, that kind of stuff. We're so far from that. And especially the lower down in price point you go, the further away you are.
Yeah, aren't you at that point? You're kind of, if you have that perfect response that you think is, oh my gosh, that's what I'm after. You have so much noise and ringing and other things that actually happens and is averaged in with that to kind of make that flat. And yet,
well, yes, but by definition,
that is there.
By the physics and acoustics of what's happening, the flatter and smoother the response is, it means all of other things had to be much lower in level to not perturb the flatness of that response. So there are ways of deriving that information from a frequency response curve, but nonetheless, it's not there. So any non-flatness will influence what you hear and will interact with the music that you're listening to. So when it comes to listening, you've got inaccuracies that interact with that particular piece of music, interact differently with a different piece of music, personal biases as to, well, I don't mind this inaccuracy, I actually kind of like it, especially with the music I listen to and in the room I listen to. Another person will come to a different conclusion. And ultimately, we're designing for people to listen to their recordings on. And those recordings, the vast majority of recordings that people listen to and even use to judge their equipment are heavily, heavily modified. It's so fun to jump on forums with recording engineers. Even go to Sweetwater and go and you're interested in a particular microphone. Is it which AKG should it be, or Sennheiser, or whatever? And read people who use microphones to record with, all talking about why they like this microphone. Oh, one of my batteries has gone out. They use this particular microphone for that instrument, not this instrument, but that one. And how do you record a string bass? Someone put it by the F hole. Then someone else said, no, never put microphone by the F hole because there's too much wind noise. You need to put it inside, but then you have also one up on the strings to pick up that part of the sound. I'm going, how does that represent the reality of what that instrument is, and then interact with how you judge on a particular imperfect speaker? It gets very difficult. So ultimately, having come from that purely technical background, because Kef was really, really technical background, and we made mistakes in how we balanced the measurement of a speaker because we didn't understand, well, its directivity is very different. When we first did UniQ, disaster, the sound was balanced wrong. Well, it's too strong a word. Sorry, Kev. I still love you. I don't mean disaster. It was an issue. So my approach is I always start off by measuring. I measure everything. And I design a system to listen to purely by measurement to begin with. Then I listen to it. And then I determine if I don't like it, is it because I asked to do the wrong thing? Or I asked to do the right thing, but I didn't meet the objectives nearly as much as I enthusiastically thought initially that I had. So I have to go and keep closing the loop, going round and round, judging that. But ultimately, it's, okay, I've got pretty decent measurements, but I couldn't get all of it flat. So I chose to make this part flatter than that part. Then I go and listen in my particular room with my equipment, with my favorite recordings, all that used a selection of different microphones, different EQ on the mixing disc, different balancers, judged over different speakers in the recording studios. And now I decide, do I like my speaker? And if I don't, I adjust it because I didn't like the sound of it. And then I just have to hope that the sound I like, because luckily for me, every speaker that's come out of this side of ELAC, the sound balance is only me. Nobody else judges that and tells me I should make it different. It's, it's mine. You like it, you don't. I don't pretend that everybody will like what I do, but clearly enough people do that I've got a business.
Well, it's always interesting, the perspective. I've had a few speaker designers on here, Richard Vanderstein being one, and just kind of, he was using FETs a long time ago. And, I know you've had a lot of experience, and again, all the mentorship and that kind of thing down the road. It's just amazing the amount of ways that you can go about it. And we're going to get into that here in just a minute, and some product. If you can, give me just 1 second. I want to get into a little bit of housekeeping here, and then we'll get right back into it. Okay. I would like to ask our guests out there, again, this is tons of fun. I'm learning lots. So please, if you will, like and subscribe to the channel here. It helps us with our Google search. And then also, if you will, go to hifibuys.com and sign up for the newsletter. It'll keep you informed of what's going on out there. Last week, we had Enno Vandermeer, founder at Roon. And you end up finding that was a really great conversation. I enjoyed that and had a lot of comments put back towards us and that kind of thing on it. Next week, I'll have the new owner of Audio Research, Trent Suggs. And so anyway, I'm really excited to have him on. He is the perfect man for audio research. And so I'm really excited about it being in their future. Also, let's see, HiFi Chats playlist, all the music that's mentioned during these things, we get on you'll see a little link, out there so that you can check out the playlist of what all the guys that have been on HiFi Chats previously, including even myself, was on one where my general manager, Chris Doty, interviewed me. So anyway, that's out there. And if we can, just remember just to be kind to each other out there. Okay. It's tough times for us all. And anyway, it doesn't cost anything to do it. So let's be kind. So I think we're waiting for Andrew. He's back. Did you lose some
battery? All the lights went out.
Oh gosh. Okay. Sorry about that. I probably didn't tell you how long this might last or whatever. So anyway,
the camera will fail next.
All right. So we have talked a little bit about the history of ELAC. I think they started in the 20s. Can you tell us a little bit about a little more about the history of how ELAC has gone through the years, and then pretty much after that, we're going to get into some product.
Yeah, well, as I say, they first started in 1926 as a electroacoustic. So ELAC stands for electroacoustic, and they were doing underwater acoustics and that kind of more fundamental acoustics in those days. And then around the early to late 40s, they moved into hi-fi and cartridges, tone arms, turntables, and they've done a whole host of electronics as well, even TVs. So pretty much everything in hi-fi they've done through the years. But the speakers really started in 1985. They bought up another speaker company and expanded their speaker operation, and particularly with the jet tweeter, the folded ribbon. So they've done variants of that through the years. They've even got a really cool speaker that they still make, which is a 360-degree ribbon speaker. So instead of taking a ribbon and putting it vertically, because ribbon speakers and folded ribbons, they have the potential to have poor vertical directivity, because as you make them bigger, you can't have them that way because horizontal directivity would suffer. Right. And ribbons need a large area to move enough air. So you have a pure ribbon in the vertical direction. Mm-hmm. Well, if you turn it that way, but then wrap it around in a cylinder, you've still got a 360-degree radiation and very, very wide vertical response. And it goes out to 50, 60, 70K. Mm-hmm. So that is an add-on super tweeter we still sell it. People still want that to add on to their systems. But I say mostly higher end speakers. And the other technology that really got me interested, which I haven't directly worked with myself yet, because it took me a while even to start using a folded ribbon, just because folded ribbons are relatively expensive, especially the one we make ourselves, which is Jet 6.
5?
Jet 5 and Jet 6. Okay. There's a Jet 6 in our flagship speaker.
Okay.
And it's built in the factory in Germany. And to this day, even the ribbon is folded by hand by a couple of women there who do nothing else but fold the ribbons. But the quality and the consistency is so good that it's now in Porsche came to ELAC to put that tweeter in the systems they put into the Porsches. Wow. So I think it's in all the Porsches now. It's even in the Bugatti Veyron. Oh, wow. Not that you'd ever hear the sound system in that with that engine.
You have to have one hell of an amp in there too.
You got enough horsepower. The amount of horsepower that amp consumes is still way less than the horsepower you've got in that Bugatti. But to qualify to supply parts to a car company. That's a particular mark of distinction, because it's not easy. A lot of the people who design, the brand names who are designing drivers or systems for car companies, they're not actually doing the building of those drivers themselves. There are a lot of subcontract manufacturers who do that, who are qualified for Ford and for all these other people. And so you just go to them to do the actual manufacturing. But this tweeter is still manufactured by ELAC in Germany. So that's a particular valuable distinction.
So they actually, I know Porsche is doing well here in the U.S., so I guess they're putting quite a few of those tweeters in our cars over here. So anyway, that's awesome. I want us to get a little bit into some product now. And so I want to start off, and, we have to choose whether we start at the bottom or the top. So we're going to start at the bottom, okay? But that's in Debut 2.0. We're kind of HiFi Buys 2.0. So anyway, we're we're excited to hear your version of 2.0. And what would be great is if we kind of heard about what you kind of felt like the sonic differences were between the two and that kind of thing, and how you achieved them.
Well, obviously, Debut was the first product that we launched when we started this operation.
Enormously successful.
Yes, it was a very surprised but welcome hit, and it solidified the reason why we did this and started in this direction.
I bet you were wiping the brow off after all that success happened. Like, oh my God.
Oh yeah, but you have to be careful here, because we launched it and we caught a lot of people out, because just like with the Pioneer speaker, we chose, well, especially with the Pioneer speaker, we went at a price point where nobody really thought to worry about that much how good it sounded, because it's a speaker at $100-ish that goes on the shelves out in the Best Buy store, and you buy it because you want a stereo system. The thought that, well, couldn't I make that as a real speaker that with a real crossover and it sounds really good? Would that be a good idea? And that was such a hit that it meant that for Debut, well, like I said earlier, we're going to do that as the step up from that speaker. And you're now into a territory where, there's some good speakers, but based on what we're able to do, we thought we can do a really good speaker. And that's how it turned out. Everyone loved it. And we noticed that having done that, it caught a lot of people off guard. So at some point, they're going to come and try and outdo it. Why not?
Yep.
So rather than just resting on our laurels for too long, normally a speaker stays on the market for at least 5 years. But if everyone's going to try and catch up, we need to be also anticipating that and come out with something as well. So decided to do Debut 2. And a lot of the thinking for Debut 2, you could say, from the idea of, if I knew what I was doing, it wouldn't be research. Well, as an engineer, you've never finished developing something. Not really. You've always got ideas you'd like to keep on trying, but you've got production and you've got money to make and keep me in a job. So you already know at that point the struggles you had in the first product. You're already starting to think, well, how would I solve that next time? And then also in reaction to the product that you released and what people say about it informs you of what you might do next time. And there's sort of two aspects to that. Are we meeting, whenever you're designing a product, are we meeting a need in that marketplace? Either performance or price performance ratio or size or whatever characteristic there's a requirement you're trying to meet. But based on the response to that, did you meet it adequately? I thought I might think I met it, but in response, I realized, some of the choices I made, and I don't necessarily mean in the sound character, but some of the choices that we made, maybe we could rethink a bit. So you get the response back from the market, and we start to get people saying, well, how close can I put it to the wall because of the vent being at the back? And there's a reason I put it on the back, because you need more space on the front if you're going to put the vent on the front, and it made it more compact visually by having the vent at the back. But get it too close to the wall, and although you don't actually choke off the vent, the bass does build up differently between a rear vented and front vented speaker when you're getting it close to the wall. And you have to be careful about designing purely from an audiophile driven point of view, because we're talking about affordable speakers, and there's a lot of audiophiles buy affordable speakers or recommend to their friends an audiophile affordable speaker, but those friends are not going to put it on the bookshelf out on stands away from the walls to optimize imaging and all this kind of stuff. They have requirements of how they're actually going to fit that music system into their lifestyle. And it might be on a credenza close to the wall. That's the only space you got. It's actually quite instructive to go out on the websites, look at all the people, especially when they say, show us your system. And you go, wow, is that where you put it?
Yeah.
Spent all that money and that's where you put it?
Yes.
That sounds judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was judgmental saying it like that.
Yes.
But what I mean by that is what we think you should do, lots of people can't actually do. The room isn't set up like that. They do
Right.
have a doorway there, so they can't place things symmetrically. It has to go where the TV is, or they're not going to move the couch. They can't do these things. So you have to be aware of that and say, okay, was a rear firing vent really the best way to do it for that market?
Right.
And so that was one of the things we made sure of with Debut 2. Put the vent at the front, change the aspect ratio, make it look a bit cuter. If we're going to make it sort of a bigger frontal area, at least make it narrower and taller so it looks a bit better aspect ratio. The other thing was,
there is no doubt that I think, you have speakers that place in rooms very easily and with almost any gear. And then you have products that have a very difficult time placing in places. So I certainly have seen some of that difference in your product as well. So
and it's also because one of the driving requirements of what I want the speaker to sound like is I want it to have good bass extension. I'll sacrifice some efficiency for extension, because efficiency just means you can't play quite as loud on the few occasions you're allowed to play that loud, but bass you miss all the time. Mm-hmm. The more bass extension you have from that small speaker, the more you will be affected by the room, because it's exciting more of those bass resonances. So it can be a bit more difficult to place the speaker. So putting the vent at the front cured that one. The vinyl.
Can I ask one other question? So you use concentric drivers in these things, and I think you do that obviously because you've kind of talked about being able to get the power response curve kind of large in the room, so that again that placement, you're still hearing a great pair of speakers with them not being in the perfect place, even if you're sitting off to the side or something along that lines. Is that the purpose of that? Yeah,
I mean, obviously being at KEF and being part of the group that was working on UniQ, that was a great learning experience and formed a lot of my ideas of what I want a speaker to be able to do. So whenever I can, I go to a concentric approach. But it's always more expensive to do that, particularly since I always like to do it as a three-way system rather than two-way. And so that adds expense.
Do Do you remember the speaker Kabasi made?
Yes, the 3-way in the big
I
ball.
think it was a 4-way, wasn't it?
It could even be a 4-way. Yeah, yeah,
That was
that was
the
a
most
beast.
incredible piece of engineering I think I've seen in some. I mean, they were ungodly good sounding too. But anyway, my apologies. I don't mean to interrupt.
Well, it just reminded me though of my time at Pioneer. Remember, I said the technology they had available, and the reason I did a beryllium tweeter and mid-range for TAD was because Pioneer had beryllium capability.
Mm-hmm.
At one time, we did this. We had this idea at Cedia to do Speaker Alley on the Pioneer booth and do the history of Pioneer speakers, because they started in, actually, that's interesting, they started in 1926 as well. Huh.
Yeah.
That's just,
and you could even put HPMs out there, man. That's
right. And so they've got this mechanic, a full range driver, 8-inch driver, aluminum dust cap with a paper cone. So it's kind of a mechanical concentric driver because the dust cap was directly connected to the voice coil former. 1926. So we had this idea of let's have all these pictures of everything. So they sent me this picture of this 1926 driver on its original carton. I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's not an original photograph. That's a more modern photograph. The clue should have been it was in color. But I'm going,
they colorized it. MGM got a hold of it and colorized it.
Yeah, colorized it. So do you still have that driver? Yes, Andrew-san. Can I borrow it? And yes. What else can I borrow? So I went from photographs to 1926, 1930s, all these drivers all through the years. Maybe it was 1938. Maybe I got the date wrong. But anyway, all through the years, all these different drivers, including a photograph because it was going to be too difficult to ship. We had a flat panel, 4-way concentric drive unit that was about that wide and go backwards, that tall, about beryllium tweeter in the middle, flat diaphragm beryllium mid-range, flat diaphragm mid-bass unit using honeycomb diaphragms, and a flat panel bass driver, all in this thing that was like 13 inches wide by about 20 inches tall. Incredible engineering, weighed about 100 pounds or something. And getting back to Floyd 2, we also had our diamond tweeter. When we were doing when B&W came out with their diamond tweeter, I was in Japan and going to the guys, okay, guys, we have beryllium, they now have diamond. And, they weren't the first because Akiton already had a diamond tweeter, but I was saying, tell me what the material property differences are between diamond and beryllium so I can talk intelligently about it. And one of the guys reached into his desk drawer, opened up this little jewel box, and inside was a diamond tweeter diaphragm. And I go, where did you get this? And he says, well, we made it. When? 1989. And we had it in the market in Japan in a speaker in 1990. And that afternoon, they brought me an original brochure and handed it to me as a present of that speaker. So I had that thing in the alley as well. So I'm walking around Cedia and I run into Floyd Toole. So, hey, Floyd, you should come and see this exhibit because it's, oh no, it was John Dibb, their chief engineer. And I said, John, you've got to come and see this because I've got all our drivers from back to 1938. So he comes along and I said, and we have our diamond tweeter. And he said, oh, I didn't realize you're doing a diamond tweeter. I go, no, John, not doing, did. When did you do that? 1989. So what process do you use? Because we use a chemical deposition onto a hot form. I said, yeah, that's the way you do it. It's the kind of back to why I joined Pioneer. Anyway, so
that's cool.
You're informed about what people want and how they use a speaker. So you change the speaker to reflect better usage. Even the vinyl we changed because it was too easily marked. So we changed back to a wood veneer, vinyl derivative. And then drivers start thinking, okay, what was the limitation in the drivers that we had? How can I improve them? How can I fix certain areas that I knew existed but hadn't been able to fix at that time? And then sound balance. And one of the issues when you're doing a Mark II version, it's clearly supposed to be better. But what constitutes better? If it was a very popular model and people were buying it for how it sounded, what happens if you make it sound different? Is it better to everybody? It might be just the way it wasn't quite right, either suited them, suited their environment, suited the rest of the equipment, suited their music tastes. So if you go and change it, they're going...
even more difficult when you're trying to hold the same price when you're introducing the speaker 4 or 5 years later.
Exactly.
I mean, wow.
And although it's marginally a bit more, it doesn't give me much in terms, it gives me, a few dollars in terms of what I can spend on a pair of speakers to...
Well, I think one of the things that I find in all this, and I find it from all the manufacturers, and I'm sure I would find it hard to believe that you don't agree with this, but you're welcome to disagree. But when we're putting systems together, and when manufacturers are designing new products, it's a whole bunch of little things that you figure out that together combine to make one larger difference.
Yes, absolutely. It is the sum of its parts, and those parts are numerous, and taken one by one, you'd be hard pushed to go, well, was that worth it? But combine them all. So you really have to look at every aspect of what you're doing. How did I build the cabinet? How did I put the brace in? What was the motor structure on the magnet? What was the tweeter characteristic? Where was I limited as to where I could choose to put the crossover frequency? Was the waveguide around the tweeter, could I change the shape a bit and improve the dispersion and get rid of some little...
Waveguides are the craziest things. I mean, how they affect how a speaker sounds is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, and I'm always a waveguide fan. Yeah, because particularly since a concentric driver is a waveguide around the tweeter. And I started doing waveguides when I was at KEF, and then continued when I joined Infinity. And I'll never put a naked tweeter flat on the baffle. I'll always put some kind of control around it to better match it to the woofer. So all of those things combined, along with my choice of what I wanted the new version of the speaker to sound like. And, from time to time, people will still say, no, amazing speaker. I like what it's doing, but I kind of still like the old B6. I don't feel I have to change it. Okay, that's okay. Yep.
Absolutely.
You bought it for a reason.
I always tell everybody, we're on this journey with you. We just want you to love your music.
Yeah, right. And I don't pretend to make the universal speaker. That's not possible.
Yep. So
if people get into an argument or try to get into an argument with me about why it sounds different from something else, I'll just say, yes, it does. And that's okay. We're so far away from perfection. It is going to sound different. Even this notion that as you go to high-end speakers, with all the extra money you can spend, the sound between all the different manufacturers is going to converge, and they're all going to sound nearly identical. Well, that hasn't happened, has it?
No. And I'm always kind of amazed at it's kind of like amplifiers, tube and solid state, and everybody kind of puts one in one category and one in another. And, and I have customers that go out and listen to different speakers in different places and have different results. And then they'll never listen to a speaker again because they had a bad experience and somebody had it set up poorly or had the wrong products with it or something along that lines. And it is amazing how I don't know, how the mind just, will keep us from sometimes being in a place that can get us quite comfortable. Because I've learned that when my brain's very relaxed, it's normally a system that's really doing great things for me. Yeah. And I find the thing that makes me so excited, my brain gets all excited, is the thing I'm going to get tired of later. And
Actually, that's a very interesting point, because I remember when I first did the TAD Model 1. So this was relatively short-lived because we used that stacking cabinet technique, the stacked layers, and they used to crack. So we kind of moved away to that from that and did the reference Model 1.
Whoopsie.
Yes. But the sound balance that I had with that was much less emotional and more kind of thinking about the music, analytical. You could marvel at the transparency and the detail, and that, all the hi-fi terms, but wasn't so easy to relax to. You had to really be careful about the partnering equipment. And, one of my dealers that I've had from the beginning with TAD, he was a master at putting that system together such that you just sit back and go, yeah, now where's my whiskey? I'm really enjoying this. But that wasn't easy to do. And I learned from that when I did reference 1, and it's informed what I do with everything else that I do, that I want a sound that, of course, it's detailed and everything, but it doesn't make you sit forward and listen to it. You kind of just, this is what I want. And part of that is getting mid-bass balance right.
Yes.
I think
getting the bass right is everything.
Yes. You want that richness and that drive without it masking the vocal. And concentric drivers help a lot in that, because the way they can present vocals and put that vocalist kind of right there just in front of you and separate it out helps in not having that mask when you're trying to play around with mid-bass balance.
I will tell you, we just got in the new LS50s from Jeff, and whatever that thing is that they're using.
Yes.
There's hardly any air coming out of the port, and it's just kind of weird. Anyway, great accomplishment by them. I apologize for putting us on here, but I just.
Oh no, that's okay.
They do concentric speakers too. I know you love the company, so I don't.
I do, and I use. In all the talks that I do, whenever I talk about designing concentric drivers, I love KEF. I did right from the beginning. I love what they are now. They have a tremendous group of engineers there. They're doing some really interesting stuff. And when they first released the LS50, as an engineer, I look at that and you go, not only did they do sort of everything you should do around a concentric driver, including curving the baffle backwards, but they made it look great as well. At least if you like modernistic looks. I've had people look at it and go, well, I prefer the square box veneer type of look. But it's a magnificent speaker. Now, the taste of, do you prefer that sound balance to some other speaker? Not mine, or people have different opinions. But from an engineering and industrial design perspective, it's a magnificent speaker. And making it better by releasing the new version, the concept of being the first ones to adopt the meta material approach to absorbing sound, kudos to them.
Pretty neat stuff. I was pretty impressed with the speaker. So listen, we are getting on an hour and 45 minutes, so we're going to move along just a little bit.
Okay.
And don't make me stop you, because I'm not trying to. Okay. Just figure if we don't move along, we'll be here till 7 or something. And it'll be like, I don't know, a mouse watching us at the end. So anyway, I want to take just a minute and ask everybody, if you will, please to like and subscribe our channel. It helps us with our Google search engines. If you will, also go to hifibuys.com and sign up for our newsletter. It'll keep you informed of HiFi Chats and also specials that might be going on, as well as actually even with ELAC right now. So also next week, we will have Trent Suggs, the new owner of Audio Research, on. So we'll be very excited about having him on. He is, again, the right fit for it. Also, I want to ask y'all if you will ask questions. I know we've got quite a few already. And so I'm very excited about that. And I have a Danish company. I can't know how to pronounce the last part of that name. So Jim Weir, if you don't mind giving me a little help there, or I can just go B&K. So anyway, so we're going to move from 2.0 to debut reference. The debut reference we've carried in the store here for, I guess, when it came out. Gosh, with COVID, I don't even know how long anything is anymore. But how long ago did the debut reference come out? Was that like December?
Yeah, November. I think we showed it just before shipping at the Rocky Mountain Show last October.
We carry the not the I guess the wood grain. Sorry on the finishes. It's the one I like
with
the
an
best.
oak wood grain or black with a walnut. Yeah.
Yep. So I think we do the black. No, the wood grain with the kind of the lighter colored grill. It's a really, really unique looking speaker. It's kind of it's almost old school. People that want to go retro can get there with it, and at the same time, it fits in about any environment very nicely. So really, just a really nice aesthetic to it. And a pair of speakers that sells for $599. I mean, it's just they're insanely good. Yeah. And I love the slat loading as well, and then also the floor standers that you have. Just again, I mean, they kind of.
Well, that was an interesting thing as well. Yeah, we talked about how to upgrade from debut to debut 2.0. Right. And at least there was 3 years in between that. Or 4 years maybe. But then in a very short time, go to debut reference, which is supposed to be better still. You know, and it's kind of, you sit down and think, oh no, not again. How do I?
There's constant pressures.
Yeah. I want to relax and enjoy life. I'm getting old.
I'm done. All right, cool. So, you know, the thing that I've always been impressed by them is I can hook them up to a 40-watt amp and get an amazing amount of performance on a low NED or something along that line, or a Rega, the IO we just got in. Both of those do extremely well. Put them on a receiver, they do really good. The center channel with the concentric driver keeps, you know, the actual sound of the left, center, and right very, you know, identical to each other. It's one of the things that I love about it, and so it's very easy to work and use in systems. And we have just found them to be just they really are a good foundation for us in business. And it gives us a place to tell people that, you know, we don't go much below this. We have one other pair of ELACs below this that we carry, but you know, this is kind of the beginning of quality audio. So if you're buying this, you get a quality sound, and you know, and you take some of these amps that are in similar monies and that kind of thing and do things to it. And then we taken them back in the back and put them on, you know, a $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 integrator. And it's freaking amazing how far they'll go. So anyway, my hat's off to you on the design and execution of that. So. And then we've got, let's see, HiFi 2, okay, and kind of the same positions and that kind of thing. There's probably not a lot to add to our discussion there, or is there?
Well, there's distinction in that it's a much more fundamental reworking between HiFi and HiFi 2.0 than it was between debut and debut 2.0. There's virtually nothing that's common part-wise. You know, different shaped cabinet, move the vent to the front, change the vine driver. That tweeter was bigger, which means the mid-range driver has to be re-engineered to have a larger voice coil so the tweeter will fit in it, which then means not just new voice coil, but a new magnet structure, a new cone design. Then I took the opportunity to change the surround on the cone to allow the driver to go down lower in frequency. So that's all new. And then, okay, well, since we worked on the Navis powered speaker and developed a new 5-inch bass driver for that, why don't I put that driver into HiFi? So, and then change the cabinet and change the bracing in there, rework the crossover. So it's, you know, brand new, much more of an advancement than with the
one of the things I've seen Wilson do as well is using kind of lasers to determine where they put bracing in the cabinet. Are y'all doing anything along that line?
So there's various methods you can use. You don't have to use lasers. The advantage of lasers is non-contact. It's not that it gives you information that you couldn't have got another way. And you know, in the simplest form, like what John Atkinson does for Stereophile magazine, take basically a guitar pickup, tape type sensor, and tape it onto the cabinet. The good thing is, with non-contact, you're not going to screw up this nice polished finish by trying to screw or glue accelerometers onto it. I mean, in development, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But since cabinet finish will affect the vibrational characteristics, it still seems a shame when you're working on a prototype, an engineering prototype, it's beautifully finished still, and then you start drilling holes in it to attach accelerometers or whatever. But yeah, you can do it both by careful modeling in 3D CAD to determine what the vibrational modes are, and then back that up by measurements. But also, the bigger the speaker is, the more modes you've got lower in frequency. So it becomes very much more important to know where to place those bracers to control all that. When we're talking about smaller, lower cost speakers, we can't afford to put that much bracing in. And it's one of these things.
You got to feel like all the time it's like, okay, I want to put one more brace in, and then all of a sudden you start losing cabinet volume and
yeah, and increasing the cost and blah blah blah. And so you kind of, on structures like this that are so clearly defined, it's a rectangular box. Yep. It's not a surprise to you where the vibrational modes are going to be. So it's not like every single time you have to start from scratch and research what you need to do. It's, yeah, that's kind of, I couldn't afford it last time, I'm putting this brace in this time.
That's awesome. I have a gentleman, Joe, you out there watching, I'm sure. He's kind of new to hi-fi, and he came in and listened to a bunch of speakers the other day and actually bought a pair of Carinas. We're doing the special with stands with them and that kind of thing. Yeah. And he for sure, and I thought for sure he ought to buy floor standers. And after we kind of put those next to some of the other things with the music that he likes and so on, he just really liked the presence of the speaker. So anyway, that is the first in the ELAC line that actually uses the Jet AMT drivers. It's
the first in my line. And when I say mine, speakers I've developed.
Yes.
Like I said, the history of ELAC.
We're going to talk about that here in just a second. So we've got a couple more questions down the road before we get there. But so tell us a little bit about the steps that you're able to make up when you get to the Carina. Now the Carina's selling the how should I say high teens I should say mid teens in the in a bookshelf speaker, and are quite capable of filling a room. They're really an amazing speaker. So tell us a little bit about how you're able to make such gains at that dollar point.
Yeah, it's interesting because in one respect, if I believe in concentric drivers, aren't I going backwards?
Well,
I debuted to Unify.
I was going to get there, so thank you.
It's always better to preempt the awkward question yourself. Rather
I wasn't going to put you on the spot. I had a really nice way of doing
it. So there is that. And you've also got to recognize, of course, that I'm saying a concentric driver is superior under certain circumstances, and I prefer it. Does that mean
everything is execution? It's not just the parts.
Correct. And not everybody would say they prefer concentric drivers. And clearly, because 99% of the speaker systems out there don't use concentric drivers. Can
I stop here just one quick second? Because I want to let everybody know one thing that's kind of cool about the Unify and the Debut. Here you have a bookshelf. And what we think about in a bookshelf normally is a tweeter and a woofer. And with this, you actually get a three-way speaker in a two-way size. And it allows each of the drivers to do less and therefore relax more. And so it's a really, really great way to look and be into buying a bookshelf.
Actually, that's a very critical point, because when we started out, when we did the first Unify, so we've released the Debut, which let's say roughly $250 a pair for bookshelves. Now we want to do something about $500. Now, obviously, we're going to do some research out in the marketplace, see what people are offering as a step up from the $250 price point to the 500. And you go and look, and it's, well, there's still two ways. They're still out the same size box. Woofer and a tweeter, definitely better finished, and supposedly better technology for the woofer cone and the tweeter. But to your average purchaser, well, they kind of, what's different about these? So they have to be informed what's different. So I thought, well, clearly I'd like to do a concentric driver, but I don't typically like doing concentric drivers as two ways. And I want to do a three-way. Can I really do a three-way speaker and concentric at $500? And the fact that we did it still amazes me. The fact that if you've ever looked at the crossover board inside it, it's kind of this, like that square with big heavy inductors. It's the most expensive single part of that speaker, more expensive than the cabinet and any driver. So it was an enormous task to do that. But it's got a clear differentiation. Not only is it concentric, but it's three-way. And why is three-way good? And now this gets back into similar to, well, how can you go back to two-way when you're doing Karina? How can you go from three-way or two-way to three-way and justify it? What some people will say, well, two ways are generally superior to three ways because they sound more homogeneous. Well, I'd say, putting my big head back on, say that's because you don't know how to do a good three-way. Yes, you've got to work hard to integrate all the drivers together in a three-way system, but
it's more work.
It's more work. But I would say that most people would say my speakers sound very homogeneous, very integrated. But it is more difficult. But what it does give you is the ability to separate out what's happening in the bass to what's happening in the vocal range. Because a two-way, when it's reproducing a lot of low bass, unless it's a very, very linear driver, which you only get when you go to the more expensive systems, it will start to modulate the vocals. And you can hear that on certain tracks that you play them, some very low synthesizer tones, especially if it's tones that are below the port tuning frequency of a vented box. The driver will be moving back and forth like that, and the voice is riding on that. And it's not Doppler that's causing the problems. It's just the coils moving in and out of the gap and being subjected to different forces. So the voice gets modulated by that. And it can be very audible. So you have to back off the volume. Now with a three-way, that does not happen. You can hit the end stops on the woofer on that Unify, and you'll never hear that on the voice. So that's an advantage beyond it being just a concentric driver.
And it's just crazy when you think of that again at $500 a pair. I mean, it's kind of nuts. So anyway, again, congrats. So let's get back into the Karina.
So Karina, going back to a two-way, I have to take care of that. I have to be very careful about the design of the vented box system and the driver compliances so that it doesn't try and unload itself too much below that tuning frequency, so that as long as the tones in the music are the vent frequency or above, you'll be okay. You won't get too much modulation. But because Karina was a replacement for an older model range that Germany had developed, the 240 series, it needed to have that hereditary element about it, which was two-way and use the jet tweeter. So I was bound by that, and so had to develop within that requirement, and then engineer the drivers to do the best within that format.
Does the jet tweeter go pretty far down?
No, they don't. Jet tweeters of that size are limited in how far down you can go.
Okay.
and they don't go down as far as a lot of current soft dome tweeters. So that was one thing I had to be critically aware of. They readily go out higher. They have wider dispersion at that top end than a dome tweeter. So I have to be aware of that as well. You know, the balance between direct and off-axis sounds and room sound.
Right.
Got to choose a crossover frequency differently. I have almost no freedom. It's 2.8K and that's it. Because if I go lower and I'm pushing the jet tweeter too much, if I go higher, I'm pushing the bandwidth of the two-way, you know, the woofer, the bass mid woofer, trying to take that too high, and then I'm getting into difficulty with off-axis responses at the crossover point. So there's all these kind of interplays that you got to be careful about. So it was 2.8K, make the woofer work well up to there, make the off-axis response work well, then deal with what is the characteristic at the top end of the jet tweeter that I may or may not want. Wider directivity is good, but it affects the sound in the room differently to a dome tweeter. So although the carina maybe is identifiably a me speaker, it's also still identifiably different because it's a folded ribbon. And you'll get the same fights as to any other topic you might pick on the internet, that some people love folded ribbons, some people hate them. But this is a tradition of ELAC, that we've been doing them for a long time. We've got thoroughly worked out designs for our folded ribbons. Our market depends on having that because people love them. And so let's push it and see what I can do with that. And that's what carina is. Awesome.
Awesome. Well, it's a great speaker. We really like them. And I've been one question. It's a kind of a unique base on it, and it uses a bottom fired port.
Yeah.
So
well, talk about being undecided as to whether I have a rear vented or a front vented. We'll just stick it halfway, fire it down and spread it out a bit.
And if your brother did it, he'd have it firing out of the top.
Well, you can't have it out the top, otherwise people drop things into it. So.
I can't tell you how many little toys from kids we found in ports over the years. Anyways, but tell us a little bit about why doing that. Because I'm sure it's more than you just.
Well, yeah, I'll invent a technical reason on the spot for doing it. So.
Yeah, let's see you on the fly.
So the problem with vents is that you've got a lot of airflow through them, so they can get turbulent when you're playing loud. So how do you solve that? You've got to reduce air velocity. The way you do that is increase the diameter. But as you increase the diameter of a vent, to keep the tuning frequency, the physics says it has to get longer. And this is the problem of vents in subwoofers. You know, we like nice compact subwoofers. As the box gets small, the vent, a large enough vent won't fit in because it's too long.
Right.
And you have to then bend it, but then the vent introduces its own turbulence. So, you know, you kind of, how do you do this? So as I increase the vent diameter, it gets more difficult to put it on the front without having a much taller cabinet. It's difficult even to put it on the back because it's going to get so long, it's too long for the front to back depth of the cabinet. So what's the dimension that's the longest? Well, it's the height. So have it face down and have a longer vent, slightly larger diameter, and you've solved that problem. Now you've got to determine, okay, it's there, so how do I get the sound out without restricting it? But at least, when I said the problem with bringing a vent close to a wall, the fear is you're restricting the airflow from the vent. That's not what actually happens. You know, the amount of depth you've got of the combination of the terminals and the wires, means you never get it so close to the wall that it literally blocks the vent. But it will slightly change the base tuning frequency of that vent by adding some air mass to it. Well, when you got it facing down and you got its own stand on it, you've defined that. So you can now tune it independently of the surface it's going to be on, because it's always going to be on a surface. Whether it's the top plate of a stand or whether it's the...
That's awesome. And you know how far it's going to be.
You know how far it's going to be. Yeah, so it maintains its characteristic.
Interesting. Interesting. We are starting to see that a little more in the industry.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're not the first to do it. You look at Polk with their power ports. They're doing, a way of doing a free-flowing vent for a long time. So it's there's not much fundamentally new in speakers. Yeah, it's still moving coil woofers, and it's a dome tweeter or a folded ribbon. It's all those, like we said before, all those little changes you make to things that add and improve the overall performance of it.
Yeah, I think at the very top end, we are starting to see some driver development by, that's pretty unique stuff and that kind of thing. I know that, how should I say, Wilson's been doing some of that. I know we've seen Richard Bannerstein with his balsa wood damped carbon fiber driver.
You look at what Purify are doing with their interesting 6.5-inch driver with that weird surround. So yeah, there's some things coming out. Yeah.
But I think I think time has proven, I don't know how many times I've said it just won't get any better. I've said that about 2 audio research products and then they killed them. So anyway, it again is just really impressive as to and I hate to use the overword thing about value, but you have always proven that just to get an amazing sound out of I think back to the Pioneers starting at $89 and then they went to $99 quickly because they could easily take it, but and probably could have gone to $199 and still sold a bunch of them, but probably wouldn't have sold the what would you say, how many of them, 50 million or something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, holy smokes, that's a lot of speakers.
I just realized why they're so good value. They're not paying me enough. That they can afford it. Put it into the product instead of me. I could have words like that.
Oh my Lord. Listen, we've got quite a few questions, so we're going to need to get into those. But I do want to talk a little bit about the Vela, which is really the next step up. And I have been amazed that woofer with the kind of crinkle cut in it. That speaker really gets down there. It's amazing, and it does it with quite a growl to it. I've been really amazed. Not really growling at me, but you know what I mean. I have to be careful with my words. You never know what somebody will pick up out of that. But it's a ferocious speaker. No, I been very, very impressed. And tell us what advances you're able to make basically from the Carina to the Vela.
So the Vela it's not my development. That is. So when we were updating some of the traditional speaker lines that ELAC had, the 240 series was given to me to be Carina, and the 400 series was stayed with the German design team.
Okay.
So the drivers in there, first of all, it's the better, more developed folded ribbon than it is in the Carina. So they're Jet 5.
You can hear it.
And the woofer, that's what we call it, the diamond woofer. This is one of the other things that first got me interested in ELAC, because I'd been seeing them at the Munich show, because they have a big corner room as their display room at the show. And I'd walk by on my way to the TV room and see this. And I, obviously first I saw the tweeters, but then they started this development, this diamond woofer cone, and I looked at that. That is cool. That I want to know what that is. But at the time, I didn't have any chance of getting to know that. Since then, I have. And it's a compound construction of a regular cone shape with that diamond faceted aluminum, sort of like a big dust cap that extends all the way to the edge of the cone. So it forms a sandwich with the regular cone. And then there's all these different beads of glue at places between the two that are strategic points to damp the resonances. So you got, it's almost like a skin type construction with damping compound behind to damp out the resonances. And it as usual, gone through various iterations of that, optimizing where to put the glue and what types of glue to get the performance that they want from that. So, and then optimizing the magnet structure and the compliance of the spiders in that cabinet to tune it right to get that bass extension out of it. Wow. I'd say sound balance is a bit different from the Carina. So setup in a room might be a different setup, maybe with Vela. I think for me, it turned out the optimum balance is facing it straight down the room rather than crossing it in. Whereas the Carina is, you cross it in a bit more. But I think that's also partly influenced by the markets that that product sells into, because of room construction and room size and reverberation. A lot of Europe is very solid construction, brick and stone and smaller rooms, sparse furnishing.
I remember in London, I stayed in a hotel and it looked like it had 70 coats of paint on it. I'm sure that had something to do with how solid those walls felt.
Yes. And think of the Scandinavian countries with the kind of furniture they have.
Yes.
So the sound balance reflects partly what is required to work into those kind of room environments as well. So, that's why setup can be different. So yes, the sound balance is different. It doesn't mean it can't be set up to sound like you want it, you or I want it to sound, but it does reflect the traditional markets that particular product has gone into. Awesome.
So I know that there are kind of two sections of design in y'all's company. I know that you've taken on the debut reference Unify Carina and also the Navis powered speakers. Which I believe are somewhat based on the debut reference type driver set, I guess. And then you get into the Vela 300 series and the Concentro line of floor standing speakers, which can be some pretty big boys and some pretty accomplished products. So can you tell us a little bit about how that arrangement works and where you see yourself going as we go down the road and that kind of thing? So
my task when I first joined was, yes, we want to expand the US market, expand the product range. And I had much more experience just because of what I've been doing of the lower cost product. So the initial task was let's split it. So I handle all of that because I know the factories, I know how to design for that kind of product. And because I'm based in the US, I have better access to growing the market in the US. And Germany will continue doing what they've been doing. But with some cross-contamination, we talk to each other, we see what each other's doing. And even their flagship Concentro speaker, they were thinking about developing it as our team joined. So, because it was to celebrate 90 years of being ELAC. So I sat down and with their chief engineer to kind of, what ideas do you want to pursue? What do we both believe in? Because the other thing is, they already believed in concentric drivers. They'd already done a concentric version of a driver using a jet tweeter. And that's not easy to do. And one of the reasons I have never done a concentric jet driver yet is because of the price points I was working at. There's no way to do that with the combination of, the way the magnet sizes work and the voice coil diameter I would need. Cost was just out for doing that. Whereas with the higher price points, they can do it. Concentro and all the derivatives from that Concentro speaker that are coming out now. So it's still largely two separate groups. I'd say marketing is more common because we're marketing each other's
Right.
products. But I joined because I saw what ELAC were doing and I liked what they were doing. And a lot of the concepts we both believe in. And so we can coexist. We're looking towards what do we do for full joint products, but we both had our plates full. I mean, I never seem to not be designing the next new speaker.
Right. Well, it's always going on. It's always going on in your head. I mean, that's just continuous. And
exactly.
but I think it's kind of like what you've said is you've worked with some great people that really have a lot of knowledge, and you've picked up an awful lot from all of them. And you combine that own knowledge to create your own thoughts. And, it's how you've been able to take things in your own direction. And, I like the philosophy of, how you go about designing a product. I know you kind of like having your own thing, so it might be a little tougher over there with the committee, I guess. So, maybe you got a rule there, and that's okay. But anyway, it's the one thing I've always loved about this industry is there's an endless learning curve, just a sea of stuff to learn about. And
the people think, you talk about Van der Steen a lot. He and I get on really well. We've been on expert speaker panels together.
Yes.
And, spouting our own philosophies. And it's actually quite interesting because, there's clearly some things that he does differently that I don't do. First order crossovers, for one thing.
Right.
But we're on this panel. There's Richard, there's Kevin Vakes, there's a Danish speaker engineer, there's me and whatever. And Robert Harley was moderating it. And he'd throw out the question. It'd go to Richard first because he was always at that end of the table. And then it would filter down.
That's
and it could all be,
there.
well, as Richard said, and then we'd do our own spin on it. And after a few of these, I said, before I actually answer, I'd just like to say that next year's panel, I'm going to sit where Richard is. So everyone has to say, well, as Andrew just said.
I could just see you guys sitting on a panel together. How much fun. I've learned a lot from Richard, and he loves to share his information, and he's also, I think, very much like you. He does not take anything told to him as fact until he's actually tested it, done it, and been there.
Yeah.
And because it's also that experience that helps you learn from it in a big way, not just being told about it. So that's how, I've learned what I know and that kind of thing as well. So, but I've tried to test him a few times, and he's pretty on cue. So is he right about everything? I don't think there's a way to be right about everything in this industry in any way, form, or shape.
No,
I think your beginning conversation in all this was really about, talking about from the recording aspect of it, but there is a what you put in, do you get that back out, that we try to achieve. But again, that is, the unicorn we're all searching for. And, are we getting closer? Yes. Are we still a long ways away? Yes.
Yeah.
When you think about the true dynamics of life, if you ever had a car accident happen right beside you, go to a live concert in a good hall. Just the life that's in those places is amazing. And I'm just sitting here going, gosh, I miss live music.
Yeah.
So listen, we're going to move into the questions because we have quite a few. And some of them actually might get involved in a little bit of philosophy from you as well. So as we know, it's not a short subject from you. So and that's all good. So if I can, I want to please ask everybody, we're going to get right into questions after this, but if you will, like and subscribe to the channel, go to hifibuys.com, sign up for the newsletter. Also, if you will, next week we have Trent Suggs, the New Innovative Audio Research, will be here with me. I'm very excited about that. Also HiFi Chats playlist of any of the music that's been mentioned in these. And, again, if y'all do have any further questions, please do not hesitate. And also, all of the previous HiFi chats are on the, if you go to YouTube, type in HiFi Buys, you'll see all of them up there. They're HiFi Chats number 1 through, after this one, 24. And I think we've got up to about 30 something lined up. So it's that's my Fridays are always fun and interesting. So and actually most of my days are. So anyway, all right. So let's get into some questions here. Are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right, Dave W. Hey, Dave. So Dave bought a pair of Adantes from us, some AF61s, and he has a question. He says, how close to the rear wall is best for the Adante AF61 for bass response?
So because they have the unusual bass loading and it's all coming out the front, you can put them quite close to the wall. They'll work very well close to the wall. It won't mess up the bass too much. It could give you some nice weight to the bass. The only thing that tends to happen is the image depth kind of suffers, and maybe some upper bass, lower mid warmth because of the reflection from the wall could be affected. But from terms of the bass, you can push them up quite close to the wall.
And if you got some good dispersion behind the speakers or in between them, would that probably help with some of the?
It'll help a little
of the mid range.
Just a little, yes.
Okay, all right. Dave, there you go. Thank you again. I appreciate the answer. And so Dave W, again, I got 3 questions from Dave, so we're going to get through them right here. What is your favorite ELAC speaker?
It is the powered speaker, the Navis.
Well, we didn't get a chance to talk about that, so let's spend just a moment talking about what that is. It's a very unusual powered speaker, and that most of the powered speakers today are taking digital inputs and all that kind of thing, and are rune endpoints and da-da-da-da-da, and you kind of came at it from what is always from you, a little bit of a different place.
Yeah, it's kind of, I'm not going to do any of that. It was more, so we look at traditional audiophile, where you want a free choice of every bit of equipment that you're going to partner with your speakers. Yep. Then we look at the new listener who's come from a computer audio background when they were kids, getting interested in music. They want an all-in-one connected. Whatever the music is on, whether it's their phone or anything, they've got to be able to play on that, and it's all in one. Well, those two worlds don't meet, because there's no, when you buy an all-in-one, you can never upgrade it. The whole system sound is contained in that, and that's what it's going to sound like forevermore. So back to talking about Kev, LS50W is that product. Perfect product for that kind of person, not the audiophile. Now, luckily, they have the LS50, so it's that without all of that in it. What we wanted to do is say, okay, can we do a bit differently and meet audiophile and new listener? To meet audiophile, they've always been resistant to powered speakers, and because you're taking away choice of power amplifier. But that's a relatively minor choice. You can still choose preamp and DAC and turntable and cables and everything else. The only thing you're giving up is the choice of the power amplifier. But the benefits you get are tremendous and already system matched. And I can say, do you like the sound of this powered speaker? Oh yeah, I love that. Okay, then isn't that enough? Why do you, batteries are going again. Isn't that enough? And so, but it doesn't meet the needs of the connected person. So what we then said is, we also don't want to make it digital crossovers, DSP, because then you have to digitize any analog source you're feeding. So again, it's not a audiophile speaker. But what we can do is build in a wireless receiver, which then has a transmitter box that is a fully connected transmitter. And so you can get every form of connection you want to it, and wirelessly, for the people who just want a good sounding music system. But at the same time, that exact same product can be used by the audiophile. And they've only limited themselves slightly in the choice of the power amplifier. And if you're a tube guy, you can still use a tube preamplifier, just not a tube power amplifier. And just the way it works with the advantages of going to active, for me, it's that we talked earlier about being able to relax into the sound. This one does it. It's got everything, but you just go, yeah, yeah. And I remember taking it down to Neil Gader.
And it's such a reasonable price.
Yeah. I took it to Neil Gader to review and set it up in his new listening room. He just moved in to it. And after I'd finished setting it up, I said to him, okay, Neil, you now have it to go and listen to. But I said, right now, as I'm listening, I kind of don't care what you're going to think about it, because what it's doing for me in your listening room is giving me the sound that I hoped people would experience from this product once I let it go. You know, I can listen to it in my system, in my room, but what's it sounding like for someone else? This is what I hoped they could achieve. And he agreed. So he gave it product of the year. But, so it's one of my favorites.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Dave, thanks. It's a great question.
I'm just going to see if I can replace this light again. So throw out the question while I do this.
Okay. So from Dave W. again, how much power is best to put on the ELAC Adante AF61s? Can I answer this? Can I answer this?
Yes.
As much as you can possibly get.
That is absolutely correct. One of the things with the AF61 is that it was designed to be a high-end speaker at an affordable price. Not an affordable speaker, full stop. Yeah, yes, I always like to give great sound for the money, but this was make design choices I would for a high-end speaker, but be able to do it in a way I can sell it at an affordable price. But that doesn't mean partner it with lower cost, lower performing equipment, because it will show that you partnered it with lower cost, lower performing equipment.
Correct.
So you have to be careful there and say, in the context of a good system, it will sound tremendous. So put it in a good system. Don't skimp. Just say, you know, if I was going to spend $10,000, still spend it, but you didn't have to spend $6,000 on the speaker. You could spend $2,500 and then spend the rest on the electronics, and know you've got a really good system which can be expanded later on by improving the speaker. And that's why also when I did the original demos of Debut, I always put a $250 bookshelf with a few $1,000s worth of electronics. And that was just to say, you can think about the system in a different way, because it will still show that the several $1,000s of electronics are better than the several $100s of electronics.
Yep.
And then later on, when you're ready to upgrade, I'll have a more expensive speaker to sell you. So you can keep buying my speakers as you upgrade.
Grow with Andrew. Dave, I hope that's take care of it. If you want to talk about that further, Dave, I'll be happy to do that with you. So
one more light. Hold on.
So Andrew T, I think we probably answered this, but maybe I can get a little brief synopsis of what you're asking here. Andrew T, and again, thank you for the questions, Andrew. The HiFi and the Debut 2 series are similarly priced. What are the primary differences? More audible, not technical, and or pros and cons of those lines?
Sorry, don't answer that. Too difficult.
Yeah, that's
so it's partly, you know how we were saying of, well, how do you go from a two-way to a three-way back to a two-way? How do you progress one product to its ultimate, a two-way speaker, the Debut, to be the Debut reference, and then jump to the next series, which was already a three-way, but a budget three-way.
Right.
It's like the different, think of a BMW 3 Series versus 5 Series. The top end of a 3 Series is much more expensive than the entry level of a 5 Series. They offer different things. Mm-hmm. Some of it's performance, some of it's different kind of performance, some of it's luxury. there's a whole host of different things that can coexist. And it's partly the issue is, well, we release them very close to the same time, and they just ended up being closer in price point than we originally intended. But they are different beasts, and just like I said, not everybody, well, 99% of people don't use concentrics. So let's say that it meets the objective needs of people who prefer two ways, or for simplicity, or like concentrics. They do sound different. They still have an Andrew kind of feel to them.
As they should.
But,
yeah.
As they should. But nothing ever sounds identical. Not when you're using different technologies. And they shouldn't, or else why would you use different technologies? So
Right.
they solve different needs for different people. So I think they can coexist, and you just listen to them and decide which one suits you better. Even if you took that same pair and took them into a different room, you might find that your preference changes because they interact with the room differently.
Yep.
So concentrics image really well. And the shape of the image is different from what the two-way gives.
They tend
Maybe
to
you
fill a
prefer
room
one
better too.
to another. Some people don't like a very focused image. They feel it's too intrusive, and they just want a bigger sound field. So,
yep. Andrew, I hope that helps you. So Andrew, I've got another question from you. How much, in your opinion, does burn-in or break-in actually matter?
So if we look technically, drivers do burn in, they do break in.
Yep.
Now, is that technical thing exactly the same as what we all believe we need audibly for break-in? To say that technically there's no such thing is wrong. Technically there is. Even in a factory environment, and an engineering environment, when we're developing drivers, base drivers in particular, they change from freshly built, and you always have to exercise them for a certain period of time before their parameters become stable enough for you to measure and design with. So the suspension changes, it softens up.
Right, they're mechanical devices.
They're mechanical devices. And you can say anything mechanical will change with time. Now, how audible is it? Clearly, the bass tuning of a loudspeaker will change noticeably with break-in. Now, that break-in, what I'm talking about, is a few minutes at high excursion. It will sometimes, after a while, settle back slightly to where it started rather than where it ended up. And so every time you start it again, it sort of slightly changes a little. The question is any other aspect of the performance changing? And a tweeter, for example, because a tweeter is typically used well above its resonant frequency. And so even if its resonant frequency shifted a bit, would you hear that when it's filtered off by the crossover network? Does the midband of a driver change? If you try to measure it, you'd be hard pushed to see any changes you could absolutely pin on. Oh, I can see now why the sound opened up. Suddenly at 100 hours, everything went whoosh, right? That's the difficulty we have from an engineering point of view in coming to terms with the idea of break-in, because often it's described not just as a progressive thing. It reached the breaking point, kind of, and suddenly whoosh. I don't even understand why that would happen.
Now, capacitors, I mean, they have dielectrics and things like that, so they form and that kind of thing, don't they?
Yeah, but all these things are relatively quick. This idea you have to play for 100 hours to do it. The idea you have to use particular types of test signal or music to break it in. I did think of doing one kind of spoof on whatever show is closest to April Fool. and say, these speakers are broken in on these music tracks. So when you got them home, they'll only sound correct if you play those particular tracks. And one of them has got to be Diana Krall, just to
So you guys beware that come next April, he's going to have a new line of speakers out called Broken.
So, you know, and there's the other aspect that the objectivists will always say, there is no such thing as breaking. It's you that are breaking in. Your perception of what you're hearing, your familiarity gradually with that speaker is what is determining this idea that it's breaking in.
I absolutely agree. And I think it's one of those things to where I've heard differences in speakers, I guess, but at the same time, I've been at this a long, long time, and it doesn't mean I have special ears or anything along that lines. It just means I've spent a ton of time with it. And I tell everybody, listening is learned. So when you bring something new and you get a better system home, you're going to become a better listener. So you're going to find yourself hearing things and hearing your system in a way that you didn't when you bought it.
Well, here's an interesting point that, I've heard things in my recordings I've never heard before with this new piece of equipment. The thing is, if you then go back to your old piece of equipment, you'll hear that thing that you hadn't heard before. It's just something brought it to your attention.
Mm-hmm.
It was there. Now, it could be a valid thing that whatever it is that brought it to your attention is the better speaker, because you'd have been totally unaware of it forever if you hadn't have changed to this new speaker. But nonetheless, this idea that you never heard it before is you weren't paying attention to it before.
Yeah.
So it's one of these, you're never going to get agreement between all the different camps.
Yeah, I know. And all you have to do is go out and search out the internet, and the new white is black, the new black is white. So,
yeah.
So I get that. I do think that there are times where you can have better gear enough that does show you more of what's going on in a system.
Yeah.
And again, maybe bringing something to your attention because of that.
Yeah.
So I'll disagree and agree all in that same kind of thing, but gosh, to disagree with you, I can't. So I'm just going to have to kind of look into that from my own end, and I will let you know.
Well, the other thing we always kind of joke about break-in as manufacturers is someone says, what's the break-in period? And I go, let me just check what our return policy is. 30 days. Okay, it's 31 days break-in.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. All right. Let's see here. So this is just so cool. All right. So Jim, Andrew, thank you very much for the question. I hope that again helps you. Jim Weir from B&K. B&K is actually a Danish company. They're actually the largest manufacturer of sound and vibration measurement equipment in the world. They've been at it a long, long time. I've probably had some of their stuff in my shop. I don't use a lot of test instruments anymore. I leave that to folks like Andrew. So he says, I like what you just said. We can measure loudspeakers precisely, but the somewhat correlated pressure variations that reach our ears is only part of the picture. And as you said, the studio recording was rendered on a system room and ears completely different than our own ears. So do you design to a particular targeted frequency balance, or do you take into account the directivity or sound power balance as well?
So, yeah, first of all, I always design to an initial target measured response. But that measured response will be a combination of things, because I recognize that a speaker is used in a room. Its directivity response is critical to its performance in the room. The ear makes a very complex judgment of the sound balance of the direct sound, the sound balance of early sounds, the sound balance of late sounds, all of which are both different because of the directivity of the speaker and different because of the particular room that you're in. I've got to judge what ratio between all those in the measured performance is the ratio that I want. I've also got to look to say that, yeah, that target response I want to go for, I'm just not going to get that. We know that. I'm going to get as close as I can, but it will be in error in different ways, in different frequencies. It's also in error between, do I make the on-axis the flattest part in the crossover region, or in the, let's say, the 3 to 5K region, or do I recognize that at certain angles off axis, there'll be a flaring in directivity response from the tweeter, which means the 5K, 3 to 5K band will hang on and not drop down off axis as much as the other bands. So even if I made it flat on axis, off axis, it'll always be a bit raised in that 3 to 5K region. If I can't fix that acoustically with the directional characteristics of the drivers and the baffle shape and the baffle size, I have to now say, okay, the crossover, do I just dip it out a bit on axis, split the difference, so it's kind of a bit worse on axis, but a bit better at 30, but exactly right at 15? Well, which room do I use to determine that? Because they're all giving me different ratios of direct to reflected. So that's where it comes to, yeah, I can measure as precisely as I want. I've got a load of B&K microphones. I've worked with people at Technical University in Copenhagen, which close relationships with B&K. I wouldn't use any other than B&K microphones, just a shout out for if I'm going to measure, I need to know that measuring equipment is absolutely right. I can't use kind of low-cost microphones or approximately calibrated microphones. I need lab standard calibration. So, but then it's a matter of, okay, so I've got these measurements. Now, what do I do with them? And what selection do I make based on how I listen to the recordings that are my favorite choices? And that's because I've listened to those recordings on every piece of equipment I've ever designed in rooms throughout the world over a period of 30 years. So I've got a kind of brain wired to what I want those things to sound like. And so then I need a quick and dirty initial room to use to go, yeah, I know it sounds like this in this room, but it'll be all right on the night.
Well, you do kind of get a feel for something. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we don't change lines very often. You get used to using something and you kind of learn the best ways to use it and things along that lines. And, that's how you build great systems, is knowing what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much. We appreciate having you on here, Jim. That was a great question. So let's see, another one from Andrew T. He just a comment from him. Appreciate that you make the speakers able to be more flexible in placement. I have a terrible space for placement of speakers. So Andrew, I know that again, appreciate it, as I said, and great job on doing it that way. So said, in the design and prototype phase of making a speaker, how do you balance the data you gather from measuring equipment to what you hear, with your own ears telling you, by golly, that's it? I like the quote there, Sid.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered that in just that last answer and previous ones. It is just experience. It's interesting. When I'm setting up to do a show, I always dread doing shows because you got a day to take this dreadful room and make it sound the best sound that the guy walking in has ever heard at that price point or whatever. And yet he's got years to do that in his own home, right? And it's a room where you've stripped everything out of it and starting from fresh. Also with equipment that, certainly if you're working with other manufacturers sharing for a room, that's very difficult because you don't necessarily know what all the parts are going to sound like together. So you got to spend all this time. There is a point, though, towards the end of a very late night, the day before the show opens, where often I'll have just got to a point of tweaking and moving and playing. I go, that's the one. That's it. That's what I was hoping to hear. So that is from that point is the point at which that matches my perceptions of what I wanted that piece of music or those pieces of music to sound like based on every time I've heard them before.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that could be on a system that cost $500,000. But I know I can't get that, but I can get some essence of it. And this is the particular version of that $500,000 sound that I'm able to get that satisfies me in the $500 sound or whatever it is.
Well, it's got to be interesting. I mean, you know, especially designing speakers from 80,000 down to, you know, what, $300 a pair, or, you know, $89 a pair. You know,
1,000 to 1 ratio.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Hey, listen, that is all the questions we've got. I just, I want to thank you so much, Andrew, for joining me today. We've been at it, I guess, 2 hours and about 45 minutes. You know, you speaker guys tend to go the longest. I think you got a bigger story to tell, which is good. So, but I just really can't thank you enough for having you today. So, folks, this has been again just a really interesting conversation, and your expertise in those kind of things is shown in your products. And you've had a lot of amazing people around you that, shall we say, have helped put a lot of ideas in your head. And I'm sure you put some ideas in their head too, as you've said in the history of you. So anyway, again, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. So guys, this is Alan Jones with HiFi Buys. This has been HiFi Chats number 24 with Andrew Jones, VP of Engineering for ELAC Audio. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thanks.